Ever had a car that just kept breaking down? You fix one thing, then something else goes wrong, but you keep throwing money at it, right? After all, you've already spent so much on repairs. I once had a Renault Clio, cheap, easy to maintain in theory, yet I ended up spending triple its value in fixes, constantly swearing, "This is the last time." Eventually, I had to tow it straight to the scrapyard. Even now, my heart races whenever I hear Renault Clio. Why couldn't I stop throwing money into it? Because of a psychological trap called the sunk cost fallacy. Essentially, continuing with a decision just because you've already sunk time or money into it, even if it would be wiser to cut your losses. In this video, I'll show you how this bias can quietly drain your wallet and your time, and most importantly, share practical ways to guard against it. So stick around. The sunk cost fallacy creeps in because we're not purely rational decision makers. Our emotions often guide us. Once we invest significant time or money, we tend to feel guilty at the mere thought of walking away, even if those costs can't be recovered. So we persist, even when it's no longer in our best interest. Take my friend Bob, for example. He dreamed of becoming a world-famous photographer. He studied at a prestigious school and poured his savings into top-of-the-line gear. In his mind, he'd be traveling the globe, shooting for elite magazines and galleries. Instead, he wound up as a wedding photographer, spending every weekend capturing stiff poses and pastel backdrops. He barely made enough to cover rent, yet he couldn't bring himself to quit. He'd already invested too much time, money, and pride to admit it wasn't working out. At one point, an old professor offered him a teaching job, but Bob refused. He still clung to the hope that he could make it big. That's the sunk cost fallacy in action. He felt he had to keep going purely because of everything he'd already put in. This same trap can cost anyone money. Maybe you've bought a pricey annual gym membership but rarely go, yet you don't cancel because I've spent so much. Or perhaps you keep paying for software or streaming services you barely use, thinking it'd be a waste to quit now. But sunk costs don't just drain wallets, they can steal time as well. One of the most striking examples is staying in an unhealthy relationship. Imagine being with a long-term partner who no longer makes you happy, but you hesitate to leave because of the years you've already spent together. Instead of focusing on a potentially brighter future, you cling to the past, afraid that leaving would mean all your past efforts were pointless. Ironically, the longer you stay for that reason, the more time you actually lose. It's not just individuals who fall into this trap, governments do too. Politicians can keep funding massive projects long after it's clear they're no longer cost-effective, simply because of the enormous resources already committed. Nobody wants to face the backlash for wasting taxpayers' money, so they continue throwing more funds into failing endeavors. A classic example is the Concorde fallacy. In the late 1950s, Britain and France started building a supersonic airplane, the Concorde. Costs quickly soared well beyond projections, and it became evident the final aircraft wouldn't recoup its massive development expenses. Still, both governments pressed on, unwilling to abandon the billions already invested. Ultimately, the Concorde flew for less than 30 years and never achieved the profit they'd hoped for, showing that even entire nations can get stuck in irrational decisions because of sunk costs. Now that we've seen how the sunk cost fallacy can ensnare us, whether in our personal lives or at a global scale, let's shift to some practical solutions. Remember, no matter how much you've already spent, you can still choose a better path forward. Focus on future costs and benefits, not past investments. Rather than obsessing over how much you've already poured into something, consider what it will cost you from now on. Ask yourself, will continuing actually benefit me in the future, or am I just trying to justify what I've already spent? Set limits and kill criteria in advance. Before starting a project or making a big purchase, decide how much money, time, or energy you're willing to commit, and stick to those boundaries. If you reach that limit without clear progress, it's time to walk away. Seek an outside perspective. When emotions run high, consult someone who's not personally invested. Friends, mentors, or professionals can offer a clear-headed view and help you see when it's best to move on. And there you have it, one powerful bias that could be costing you thousands and valuable years of your life. It's easy to let sunk costs dictate our decisions, but by focusing on future benefits, setting clear limits, and seeking outside perspectives, you can break free from this trap. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever fallen victim to the sunk cost fallacy? Share your story in the comments below. If you found this helpful, please give it a like and pass it along to a friend who's been stuck in a situation and might benefit from this perspective.